Hello, and welcome to In Bed with Books, the podcast where we talk about smutty fantasy with each other and with you. My name is Melissa.
And I'm Bethany.
And where else can you find us, Bethany?
You can find us in a few places. On our website, inbedwithbookspod.com, and also on Instagram at inbedwithbookspod. We also have a Discord, which you can follow in the link in our bio.
And then if you go to the description box below, check out those links and you can find us anywhere else.
And what are we talking about today, Melissa?
Let's find out.
All right. Okay. We are meeting you at the tail end of Scorpio season.
Yes.
And we're trying to think of like, oh, what's like a fun thing to talk about, right? And we were like, let's talk about death.
Yeah. It feels fitting. And at tail end, I think this should be airing like on the 21st.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is, I want to say, like the very, very last day of Scorpio season.
Yeah.
So basically, I am double checking that just in case, but let's see here. Not a promo, but this is my Honeycomb Almanac, which is like a planner with all of the like
planetary.
Yeah, all the movements, all of the ingresses, aspects.
I love
that. This will be on the last day of Scorpio, so Sagittarius is gonna start like to 1 a.m. on the 22nd. So
okay,
just in the nick of time.
Yeah.
So exciting stuff.
Melissa, give us a brief like idea of what Scorpio and death have to do with each other for those of us who don't know.
So it depends on, I'm coming from a Hellenistic, like a traditional Hellenistic astrology standpoint. So I know that a lot of modern astrologers look at the houses in a natal chart as like Aries is the first house, and it goes around until like you get to Pisces in the 12th house. And so for them, Scorpio is pertaining to death because it's like the 8th house, which is the house of death, other people's money, loans, debt, but also death. And okay, so for me, with the Hellenistic, like traditional astrology, it's less having to do with that, and it's more that Scorpio likes dark gothic shit. They like to like go in the dredges. So Scorpio is a water sign, oddly enough. But when you look at the other two water signs, which are Pisces and
Cancer.
Hold on a second. Huh?
Cancer,
thank you. I was like, it's another like baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're very soft. They're very sweet. So they're like a river or like, a nice pond or something. And Scorpio is like a hot spring or a hot tub set to like max. It is cleansing in like a gross way, in like a fun but gross way, in like a crucible. I always use that. I use that like metaphor all the time, but like it steams out. It's like it's forcing you to get through and talk about shit,
Right.
So at that point, sorry, I'm just gonna whip this out again. With the sun there, it's just like amplifying those vibes. And so it's like, of course, Halloween falls during Scorpio season.
Yeah.
Because we all like to dress up and we like to get scary. And even people like, I don't like horror, but I like Halloween.
Yeah.
Because it's just the vibe when it's happening.
Yeah.
I was watching an episode of the astrology podcast where they talked to the founder of CoStar, which I thought was a really good interview, by the way. I had my reservations about CoStar because of like some stuff that I had seen it put out and everything, but they were really awesome about just fully acknowledging that stuff. But they were also like, if you see things that come out that are edgier or that are darker or sometimes even gross, that's me being like the Scorpio asshole. They don't say asshole, but like asshole that I am. I want people to think about this stuff because we should be thinking about this stuff. And that is such like a Scorpio thing, is to think about things that make you uncomfortable.
Right. Okay.
To dredge that shit up.
Yeah. I love that.
I think like another good metaphor for using like the water element is like a trench.
Mm-hmm.
Like the shit at the bottom of a trench is fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
That's Scorpio.
Okay. So Scorpio season at an end, literally, and we're going to end it with talking about death scenes in the books that we've read. And so thank you for that introduction, because I have always been kind of like Scorpio's always been kind of mysterious to me.
They like to be mysterious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of Scorpios I know don't seem like that. Mm-hmm. But that's because it's a secret, right? Like, yes, it's kind of like behind this not a facade, but like just behind many layers, I think.
Layers, yeah, like boundaries and everything. I do think part of it is because Scorpio likes to deal in things that you don't just kind of talk about in normal conversation. Mm-hmm. They aren't exactly small talkers.
Right.
Unless you're like, small talk includes really like deep philosophical, let's think about the purpose of like life and death, and you can't like, they always have to bring in the shadow side of things,
right?
And so I think that's like not everyone is open to that conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like they know that, you know.
Yeah. So our favorite death scenes, and this will be exciting, don't worry, this isn't going to be,
it's mostly depressing. All of the deaths that have like traumatized us. So.
Yes. So here we go.
Yes. Naturally, first on the list is Ansel. So
yeah,
we only talk about him every single season.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Everything goes back to Ansel.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Do we want to like do catch up or anything, or?
Yeah, I feel like
should we just go straight into it? Okay.
Yeah. How's life?
Life is good. I'm in bed because that feels like fitting, as we are in bed with books podcast, and mainly because if Milo wants to cook, he can, and if he wants to play guitar, he can, because now we have a room with a door.
Yeah.
And I'm totally fine with, like, I got my setup and I'm comfortable in my bed. So that's what I've been doing. We've been just unpacking and enjoying the weekend and kind of walking around the neighborhood, which has been fun.
Nice.
But yeah.
Some of those park pictures that you posted, just absolutely gorgeous. They remind me of there's the park that Taylin actually lived next to, and she lived in London. That was like next to Baker Street.
Ooh, yeah.
And it had like winding
over by
paths.
Regent's.
Yes, Regent's Park.
Yeah, Regent's
Park.
Was, yeah. Yeah, Regent's Park is like huge, and it's
it was gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. That's what your park reminds me of.
Yeah, that's funny because it's actually a really small park, and I was like, that was like nice. That was like the park, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Nice because then you just like walk down that little thing, and then to your right is this like library, and my library is fucking adorable. It's like,
oh my god,
a brick building with like
sold
pillars and shit, and then you like walk in and it's like really small and cute, and I was just like, it has like the high ceilings, like it's like this old building, and I was just like, holy. It was funny because we're driving literally over to like go get our keys like that morning. Yeah. and I hadn't noticed, but I like look over and I'm like, and Milo's like, what? Like like I genuinely freaked him out, and I was like, it's our library. I was just like, it's too cute. So I got my library card, and
Hell yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I've just been, it just still feels kind of surreal, and yeah, but we're excited. We're starting to kind of feel like real people again.
Yeah, the
How
progress
about,
photos are adorable.
yeah. How about you? What's up with you?
Um, let's see. I got a slight promotion with one of my clients. Yes, which is exciting. I don't want to give a lot of details yet, mostly because we haven't hammered out the details,
Yeah.
but it's gonna be nice. So
Good.
let's see what else. I've been making this pumpkin shake
Mm-hmm.
pretty much every day for the last week because it's so delicious. Um, it's just pumpkin, frozen bananas, almond butter, almond milk, and spices.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing.
It's
I
so
have
good. I'm so like deep in
I have
fall. I
all of
whipped out
those
the
things.
sweater.
I should eat. I
Yeah,
should make one.
it is like a quarter cup of pumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
So a quarter cup of pumpkin plus 2 bananas, and then the other measurements are just whatever you want.
Nice.
Just feel it out, yeah. Let's see here. What else? What else? I'm voting. So by the time this comes out, that will be late news, but I hope everyone got out and voted
Yes.
because what a time to be alive. So,
Just
sarcastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's about it. I've
Yeah.
got Jake down here with me.
Yes.
He's sleeping on his bed that I threw under my desk. And I'm just about to lift my chair a little bit, so I'm a little bit slightly taller. So,
Yeah.
yep, there we go.
Bunny, I don't know where she is. She's somewhere. But my cats don't know boundaries. So
Yeah.
if there's a door closed, they like can't handle it. Like they think they should just have access to everyone and everything at once.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, now there's a door. And so it was like, then they like scratch, but she's literally sitting in front of the door staring at it. And baby is probably on the other side of the door staring at it. In fact, I can see her shadow pacing as we speak. Like, why? You guys are weird.
Also, so my former roommates got another kitten.
Did they?
Yes. And so they sent me pictures. I'll show you later. And I went to my mom and I was like, they got another cat. And I didn't say who it was, but she knew.
Yeah.
She knew who it was.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah, she's adorable. And her and Archie are in love,
that's good.
which is cute. And Archie's ass is getting so big because he's finally like growing a little bit more again.
Yeah.
He kind of got long there for a second, but now he's
Yeah.
filling out because it's winter. So,
Put on
Yeah.
that winter weight.
and that's what you missed on Glee.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Okay. Shall we get into it?
I think we shall.
Okay. So,
Okay, wait. I do actually want to ask real quick before we get into this because I know we have some deaths related, it's tangentially related to this. Have you been watching Rings of Power?
Okay. Unpopular opinion. I have not been watching it. I've been sleeping to it.
I don't know so much that that's an opinion as it is an action.
Yeah, so Milo has been watching it, and I'm in the room, but I'm not really paying attention.
Mhm.
It's visually beautiful.
Yeah.
It's got the budget of, whatever. It's insanely well made. But Milo's kind of like, oh, there's just like a lot of talking, and
There is.
yeah, so it's just like the pacing's just kind of a little off. I do remember something about it, which was every single time you're in a scene with like people, and then they like leave the scene on a cliffhanger and then they move to the next scene. Like that was like almost too much. Like I was just like, well, that's annoying. Every
Yeah.
single time you like switch a
Yeah.
scene, you're like, ugh.
They're
So
like writing it like an Amazon show instead of um
like a
like a
Lord of the Rings
like a
show.
Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did read a rumor that Amazon was gonna basically demote those writers or those showrunners. So not pull them from the project fully, but like demote them and bring on somebody new because of all of the complaints about stuff like that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. Because yeah, you're definitely not the first one to have said that. And I will say that like the first half of the season was definitely a labor of love.
Yeah.
Like for some of the storylines, I was okay, so like Elrond and Durin. So Elrond's whole storyline, I liked the plot that was going on, but it was
Mm-hmm.
happening so slow. And then for like Galadriel and then later meeting up with Halbrand, I liked them as characters, but I was kind of like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And so for like one storyline, I was paying attention just because I liked the characters. And then the other one, I was paying attention because, yes, I like the characters, but also I'm more curious about the plot right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like they had to have been conscious of that because that's why they like jumble it so much.
Yeah.
And I do think for too long, it's unclear how the stories are connected. I don't mean like the big reveal about Halbrand and his actual connection to the Southlands, but like the action that happened in the Southlands felt just very disconnected up until the very end.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like we spent too long establishing each thread before they got tied together.
Yeah, exactly. It did feel very, you felt kind of lost. You're like,
Yeah.
why am I watching this? I did find the dwarves really cool.
Yes.
They
And
were my
also there's
favorite
Khazad
part.
Doom.
Yes,
It's so sad.
I know. Because then like after Mila finished it, we started watching like the Lord of the Rings. And then it got to that part in Moria, and I was just like, this, because I remember I'm like, oh my God, this music. It's like,
Yeah.
when they're like looking at the whole like big hall and stuff. And I was like, it was really cool because so unfortunately, the show Lord of the movies and the books, Lord of the Rings, well, the movies, don't give you a lot of dwarf. You have
Yeah.
Gimli. Gimli is your representation of all of the race of dwarves,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so when they go to Moria, you kind of see this like tomb essentially, but you don't really get to know dwarves. Now, in the Hobbit movies, you get to see dwarves, but it's a much more like whimsical
Yeah.
like representation. And so this was actually did what I thought did really well was like kind of bridge that gap of like
Mm-hmm.
here's like because Gimli was like a huge like comedic like part of Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
and that was also a representation of dwarves, but they were also like staunch and like incredibly
Yeah.
talented. And so here you are in this hall with I forget his name in
Durin.
Rings of Power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Durin. And like that was just really cool. So it was like this like fun mix of like fun and also like um I don't know, clever. I'm not looking for the
Yeah.
right word, but
Like
you know what I mean.
stalwart.
Stalwart, yes. Like
Um,
yeah.
I fully agree. And I think part of that is because like by the time we get to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, the dwarves are like on their decline.
Mm-hmm.
We've entered the age
Yeah.
of man. And so I can't imagine that they live that much longer after.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the reason that like Khazad Doom looks the way that it does in uh Lord of the Rings is because it's very much like this is this was the peak of dwarven infrastructure and
Yeah.
society, and it's nothing now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it is nice to see that, one because the dwarves are awesome, and then two because we really get to see how far they fell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with your
Yeah. I
critiques
mean,
on the
and
show.
that is the only 2 cents I have to say about it, because I like didn't really watch it. So
Yeah,
I don't feel like I can make that big of an opinion, but
no, that's
based off of
fair.
what Milo thinks and the scenes that I saw of like the dwarves and stuff was really cool.
Yeah,
But
nice. Okay.
you're in love
Yeah.
with Sauron.
Um, from this specific fan fiction, yes, I am.
Yes.
So
I
I
love
just had
it.
to think about the show as fan fiction before I
Yeah.
could settle with myself.
Yeah.
I've rewatched the scene where it's like revealed because I was like, maybe I was just so lost in his eyes that I saw it as more sexual than it was.
Right.
But no, it's like it looks like she's about to say yes. It looks like she wants to say yes.
Yeah.
And that's not just me. So that's fun. It was great, you know, for my whole perception of good and evil in the world.
Yes.
No, but I will say that I spent like a good few days having to come to terms with that because Lord of the Rings has really always been this very easy, like good versus evil, black and white
Yeah.
thing that you can watch. Like in the real world is where things get blurry. But here we've got like Aragorn redeeming himself. We've got Gandalf reaching the status of the White Wizard. We've got Sam stepping up, and like it's a very clearly defined lines of who's heroes and who isn't.
Yeah.
And in more ways than just like Sauron and making us horny for Sauron, this show is changing that.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to come to terms with. So
Yeah. It is kind of an
it was like a 2 or 3 day existential crisis.
yeah, yeah. You were like trying to like come to terms with it. I feel
Yeah.
like there is this thing happening in culture and art, which is, the Joker. We're all watching what made the bad guy bad,
Yeah.
and I feel like I've, when you were like, it's all about Sauron, like the Rings of Power, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like that's interesting that like, yeah, you like kind of like start, you go backwards because you want to know how the bad got bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's this like answer that we need.
More villains are getting to be understandable.
Yeah.
And
It's a good word for that.
yeah, and like I don't
Not redeemed, but
yeah, exactly. Not redeemed, but
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing that they're human. And on the one hand, I think that's like a great message to be sending because it's very easy to like when we're talking about politics again, it's the elections right now, so of course like
Yeah.
it's on the mind, but like people love to throw around like really vicious names like, oh, they're like Hitler,
Yeah.
or this person is like the next whatever dictator or evil person, or this person's like Voldemort or shit like that. And it's like on the one hand, whatever. But also I feel like that really dehumanizes these people
Mm-hmm.
and like helps you, or like makes people in a way like detached from the fact that they're a normal person. 10, 15 years ago when they wanted to get into politics, they probably were just as like hopeful and like I guess like positive is the word that I would use for this. Like I look at AOC and honestly, it's a miracle that she hasn't already been corrupted.
Yeah.
And that's not a comment on her, but a comment on like the way that politics functions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's nice that our movies are doing this now, because when you create a villain who's also human, it's a nice reminder that like they're not all a Voldemort. They're not all like the proverbial devil in these stories. Even the devil has had stories where we hear his side.
Yeah.
Paradise Lost, like
yes.
it is better when we have stories like this, but it was very jarring for me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it wasn't good or like it was like a bad path for the story to take.
Right.
I don't know how much of that actually connected, but in my
It
brain
did.
it did.
It did.
Okay. Okay.
You're
Sometimes
there.
I feel like I'm just like prattling off, so
No, you're good. You're doing it.
okay. Thank you.
No, I love it. Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
officially starting the episode.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Well, we got to catch up. We got to see what's out in the
Yeah,
world,
exactly.
you know?
Exactly. We had so many shows and so many things happened
I
during
know,
our
because
break.
the House of the Dragon or whatever is supposed to be good. You've seen
It
it,
was
but I haven't.
so good.
Yeah.
I have always been a staunch supporter of the Starks. I
But
might
now.
I know. I don't, so I've been avoiding all of like the, I guess you can't really say spoilers because it's based off a book that was published so long ago. But I'm really hoping that the Starks support the Targaryens, because if not, emotionally I can't handle that after Sauron. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm already divided in my brain.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll have to watch that one next.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so some first thoughts about death scenes that we have kind of a list that we've come up of like specific death scenes that have like stuck out to us or that made a huge impact on us.
Yeah.
I would say a good one to start with is our Blessed Victor,
Yes.
because that was like one of the first times I like cried in a book, like ugly
Oh,
cried. And I remember like Milo was like sitting next to me and I was like, don't look at me. I was like, I can't. And I was just sat there and I just like cried because it was just it was so emotional. And it was like the way it was written, like Armentrout has this interesting way of writing that I've talked to other people who've read her books now. And I'm like, and I'm still kind of trying to put my fingers on it, but she has this way of writing that's not it's not like explicit. It's like implicit. Does that make sense? Like it's
Mhm.
happening.
She really knows how to guide you
Yes.
to where she's trying to get.
Yeah, it's not like this happened, this happened, this happened, and it's not and then I felt this and then this was this, like it's not so internal and it's not so external
Mm-hmm.
or objective subjective. Like it's very it it feels like you're kind of experiencing it inside out, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting. And so when it happens, it cuts you, like
Oh yeah.
Victor's death, because her Poppy's relationship with Victor is her only relationship with any man that's like
Yeah.
good. And Tawny even isn't that like close of a person. So Poppy really has no one except for
Yeah.
Victor.
Victor's the only one that she can be honest with in the way that she needs to be at that point.
Yeah.
And I don't totally see what you're saying about her writing, because like the scene, she doesn't really explicitly say anything about like the way that, because it's all Poppy's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so all we get really is like what Victor is doing at the very end,
Mm-hmm.
which is like he's struggling, the last words that he says, the moment like he stops breathing. And just based on what we know from Poppy, we know how like desperate he was in those final moments, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that one hurts so much.
Yeah.
Arguably, his death is what sets off the chain of events. Because, yes, she was already falling for Hawke and everything. But if Victor was still alive, she would not have gone along with everything that happened afterwards.
Right.
And she kind of inadvertently admit, because in the entire second book, she's like wishing he was there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He definitely lived on in that way.
Yes.
Because
Also,
didn't he have like the dagger?
Yes, he
someone
gave her the
else.
dagger,
Yeah.
but we don't really know how it and what the chain of events was. All we know so far is that it was the little sister of, oh shoot, it's one of the Wolven who his name starts with a D, I want to say.
Beckett.
No, D.
I know who you're talking about though.
Yes. So it's his little sister. So we know how it was made now.
Right.
But also our suspicions. Okay, so remember in A Shadow in the Ember where we find out about the victors? And we're like, oh my God, what if Victor was a victor?
Yeah. Yep.
He's confirmed. Yeah.
Yes.
And based on some of the snippets that she's been releasing, Armichout, and
Yeah.
like her promo for this, which I need to buy those books. Okay. He likely remembers everything. So the entire time that he was raising Poppy, he knew who she was.
Oh. Damn.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just like the girl that he raised, but the granddaughter of like the woman he's, I'm assuming, gonna help protect.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Victor.
So in case
Victor.
we wanted to add another layer of sadness to
Yeah.
that, that's where it is.
There it is.
So yep.
All right, what's the next death we have to talk
Okay, so like how would you, okay, so two questions. One, kind of unrelated to that, but semi-related. Do you prefer or do you have like opinions about regarding to like deaths that are random in books versus deaths that seem to serve a purpose? So like Victor's death served a purpose. Ansel, I would say, is next on the list. Ansel's death served a purpose. This kind of like the death that sets off the hero.
Well, I think all deaths have a purpose if the writing is good. So the idea then would be what kind of purpose, or like if it sets off a chain of events, or what is at stake, right?
I would argue that not all deaths serve a purpose.
Okay.
But
Which ones?
I sometimes like that, but like I guess I would say that like, so it's not necessarily that, so some deaths don't push the plot forward, I should say.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if they serve like a plot purpose versus like a symbolism purpose, which is debatable whether some do and whether it was intentional.
Oh, okay.
But like plot, like the purpose being like driving somebody forward versus like driving the plot forward. It can drive a character forward.
Right.
But like had this death not happened, further events wouldn't have happened the way that they did, you know?
Right.
So like Harry Potter deaths, arguably not every one of them serves a plot purpose, but they all seem to kind of have this like symbolism around them.
Uh-huh.
So like Dobby dying,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't really push the plot forward because Dobby's death or living would not have done anything further. But like kind of showing like the death of innocence during war, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I probably prefer deaths that have a purpose, but I can appreciate when death happens because it is, I don't want to say realistic, but that shows that there is a stake.
Happens. Yeah.
Like
yes,
that it isn't just like, oh, everyone's fine all the time. Yeah, like Serpent and Dove, like I've mentioned this before, like had kind of a feeling of like they're just hanging on by a thread. Not that like deaths played a role in that, but like that's kind of what
Mhm.
death can do, is make you feel like, oh, like not everything's just like, you know, because in
Mhm.
fantasy you kind of have different spectrums of like how safe everyone is versus how like
Yeah.
stark everything is, you know.
Especially like even though Ansel's death was very like it was a plot point,
Mm-hmm.
it did add to those stakes. Yeah. Um I do think I kind of prefer the ones that don't push the plot forward.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's done like I liked Victor's. Because I do also think that she needed to not have him there.
Right.
And there's no other way he wouldn't have been with her.
Right.
No other way in a million years.
Yeah.
But there's also I think it's a little bit of like the plot point deaths you can feel them coming because it'll be like they'll be making plans for the future and the scene before, or when we get back, don't say
Yeah.
that now, like that shit. And you're like, would you shut up? Shut up. Like,
Yeah.
stop. But when it's those really, really random ones, like Hedwig dying, where it was just like
Yeah.
Hedwig flew over to like help, that was the first time as a kid that I was like,
Shit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so even in the Percy Jackson books, in the original series, the deaths I don't want to say were like predictable, but they kind of like had a very like subconsciously or unconsciously followable pattern.
Right.
And so there'd be like little hints, and so little me could figure it out. But then in the latest series, Trials of Apollo, one of the main characters from a previous series in this universe, he was helping them. And so the others are escaping and they look back and they watch as this like what was a main character in one of the previous books, a son of Jupiter and like a very valiant fighter, is killed. And then Apollo, even though it's not really like a plot point that drives the plot anywhere, Apollo then has to like cope with the fact that he was kind of directly responsible for this.
Right.
And so that's one of those ones that I would say probably is plot driven, but it's not so much that like every action that he takes afterwards is driven by this one action, like it was with Poppy and Victor, or Lou and Ansel.
Uh-huh.
But generally he wants to like be a better person because he's like, I should have been able to prevent that.
Yeah.
I because I think I've mentioned this series before, but the whole series is about Apollo having to like become a better person. He's kind of
Yeah.
become this asshole. He's terrible. And so that was the first moment when he's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
consequences and actions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I like plot driven when it's subtler.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
Because it's also like
So go
an
ahead.
easy, it's also kind of an easy
yeah.
like solution to like move a plot forward, or like a big trying to get like reactions, like the Game
Yeah.
of Thrones thing, you know.
Yes. Like
But
don't
it's
trust
like,
the weddings. Don't trust.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it seems like that it seems like an easy like way to move a plot forward. It's like, ooh, I
Yeah.
could kill them off, or like a what shock factor. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think if it's more subtle or tertiary, like
Yeah.
rather than like the focal point of like the plot, it could be a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. And I think too, part of my like hesitation with that goes back to the I don't know if there's like a word for this, but it's kind of like brought up in feminist conversations about fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's related to like the refrigerator theory, which is that if the woman in the scene can be replaced by a refrigerator and nothing changes, then
Yeah.
it's not actually like you don't have a woman in your scene.
Yeah.
And so the kind of like related point to that is killing off women to push the plot forward, because it like draws the emotions, even if it's not the shock. So like Marvel did that with their Infinity War Endgame duology. So in the
Right.
first one, to get the Soul Stone, they killed off Gamora, who was like the kind of the glue of the Guardians of the Galaxy group.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, of course, the group is so sad about this. And then they did it again in Endgame with Black Widow, who was the glue for the Avengers.
Right.
She was the reason that they even all stayed in contact by that point. So then it's the drive that they need to do what they need to do to defeat Thanos, you know?
Yeah.
Which is like, can we stop sacrificing women for the plot?
Yeah.
But I don't think every instance is like that. Now more and more we're seeing that isn't the case. Now we're using twinks like Ansel and Sale. So
Yeah. There was, okay. So in Throne of Glass, there was a lot of backlash that Moss got in the second book. Is Crown of Midnight. Oh, what's her name? I have to look up her name really quick. But
Okay.
she is a princess of another land.
Oh,
And she's a woman of color. And she gets, spoiler alert, killed off. And a lot of
convenient.
people didn't like that.
From what I've seen of Throne of Glass, there also aren't that many people of color in
Right.
the book. Okay.
Yeah. So that being said, that's like kind of one instance. And I do think she has probably learned from that. That
Yeah, I
was
was gonna
like
say, I feel
her
like
first series.
I feel like ACOTAR is like definitely diverse, and then I would say Crescent City less so,
Right.
but she also makes up for it. I guess I can't really say makes up for it, but she has more diverse creatures in Crescent City.
Mm,
And so I feel like we don't really get their like race very often.
right.
And so any implied or imposed lack of diversity might also just be my brain's default and not filling in where it is actually relevant.
Nehemia, that's her name. She was
Yeah.
badass because she was like a fighter and she was gorgeous and she was really like clever. She was like a really good character, and then they like killed her off. And like the idea was that they killed her off to move Aelin forward,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like that was the purpose of the death, which I think a lot of people weren't like happy with. Like it wasn't like a
plot-wise,
plot.
structurally.
Yeah, like there wasn't
Yeah.
like any other like, not that I mean I haven't read the next books, maybe there's more to it, but anyways, yeah, that's like kind of an example of that, I guess.
It does remind me, if we're kind of stepping away from like the gender issue with it and looking a little bit at race too,
Mm-hmm.
another superhero one. So sorry.
Okay.
In one of the recent X-Men where it was like in the past, so it had James McAvoy, they introduced a character who
I love him.
James McAvoy, yeah. So the character is black, and his power is supposed to be that his body immediately adapts to whatever threat is making him, is like gonna kill him,
Right.
to the point where like I know in some comics his body is just full on teleported to a different space because whatever the threat was couldn't, it was like, well, the best option is to just not be here, so we're gonna teleport now.
Right.
But in the movie, to kind of like show how powerful the villain is, they killed him.
Right.
And it's like, but if his whole thing is that he can't die,
Yeah.
then
that
what you've just
sucks.
established is like, yeah, it's like just kill off the one black guy first of all, because
Yeah.
X-Men doesn't have that many. It's got like Storm, you know,
Yeah.
one. And then even though at the time I didn't really know who he was, I was like, that feels like, I didn't know kind of like some of the stuff that he'd done in the comics, and I was like, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
That feels off. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, either the woman or the person of color the person of color who's better at the person, better at better than the main character at their job,
Yeah.
has to be killed off to show how scrappy they are, so they can rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do think, yes, so just kind of going back to that original question, I do think that deaths to push a plot forward aren't always inherently bad.
Right.
I just don't want people to be lazy with it, you know?
Yeah, like I want it to yeah. Don't want well thought out.
Yeah. Sometimes it reminds me of like the pregnancy trope, where it's like, yeah, you know, sometimes the pregnancy trope is whatever.
Yeah.
It's not a trope if it's just happening. But when it's used as a plot point, then it's a trope.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, this feels icky.
Yeah.
A few deaths that we've got in here are from Lord of the Rings, and I do feel like they fall under that like well done plot driven deaths.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you want to talk about one of yours first.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, Milo and I have started watching Lord of the Rings again. Mostly high. So everything has like a new sheen over it because we've seen the movie so many times. But the Boromir's death is like so much more like I was telling, or Milo and I were talking about it last night, how much like how everyone shits on Boromir. Like everyone hates him. And I'm like, they're racist against humans because literally literally Aragorn was like, I wouldn't take that ring within a 1,000 leagues of that city because he doesn't trust men, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, poor Boromir, he's just like, but what if we can use this now? Like,
I mean, we know like, he's wrong, but no one's actually really explaining it to him.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like no one's actually being like, that's a bad idea and here's why.
Yeah.
Like everyone's like, shut up. Just sit down. Like, sit down
shut
now.
Up, steward's
Go
son.
to bed. Like, yeah, steward's son. Yeah.
Shouldn't you have died already, human? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
But because there is that like, I guess just realizing too, it's right after Gandalf dies, another death, and they're all like coming out of the mines, and they go to Lothlorien, and there's that kind of scene where Galadriel's like talking in everyone's heads, and they're all looking at Frodo in like this doubt, and like that's when like things start crumbling, like because Gandalf's dead, like their hope is dead.
Yeah.
And now it's like up to Frodo, and I'm like, why does everyone hate Frodo? But it's like that's kind of where it starts breaking. And what I love is that even after that, Boromir saves the hobbits.
Yeah.
Like he could have just run off.
He could have stolen the ring very easily.
And just run off. And so he, as much as he was the one that was like, let's do it, like he was I think the least, I think he made like a more clear decision. Like he didn't just say no, like he like,
I feel like he really struggled, and we don't give him credit for that.
Yes.
And I didn't really think that until I saw the deleted scene between like where it shows the past, where it's like him and Faramir and their dad.
Mm-hmm.
And Boromir's not a bad guy.
No.
So like, if we want to look at the timeline real quick, they call some of the men to Elrond's house. And at this meeting, they present a very powerful ring, the lore of which has been muddled through 3,000 years since it's like making. And they belittle him at the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And in the books, it's even like a little bit more. Like he asks questions at the dinner, and they just kind of like, they're like, "You small child," because Aragorn's like 80
Your
something.
sweet summer child.
Yeah, basically, they're like, "Oh, you're so young."
That's true, because he probably is really young
He
compared to
is,
them.
he is,
Yeah.
but like also
I
he's
didn't think
older
about
than us,
that.
or he's about the same age as we are technically. So if somebody said that to me, regardless of how old they are,
Yeah.
I'd be mad too.
Yeah.
So they like he gets belittled at first, and then he's like having a power struggle with everybody anyway, because everyone else is having a power struggle with each other too, because
Yeah.
they all want to be the top dog next to Gandalf. And then the ring is talking to you the whole time. I'm sure it was very hard after a while to tell his own part with like thoughts away from what the ring was telling him.
Right.
Because that's how the ring gets you. Like it targets one person,
Yeah.
and then it goes from there.
Yeah.
Especially like the scene between Smeagol and Deagle,
Mm-hmm.
because they're like best friends. It's already like it's like a 3 to 5 minute scene, and you can see that they're best friends. They're spending the birthday together. It's a great day. They're fishing together. How fun. They search for each other in the water after like the one falls over, and then he kills him.
Yeah.
That's not like that's power, basically.
Yeah.
Like people like to ignore the fact that the ring is super powerful.
Yeah.
So hashtag Boromir rights. Like
Yeah. Seriously. So all hail King Boromir.
Steward.
Steward. Yeah, Steward Boromir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But his death and Gandalf's death are definitely like a 1-2 punch.
Mm-hmm.
I think Gandalf's death drives, like you said, like the end of the Fellowship. Like that's when the cracks start to show.
Yeah.
But Boromir's death is the reason that Frodo and Sam go on their own.
Yeah. Yep. Because Boromir is their link to Minas Tirith if they ever needed to go to Gondor. So they're like, well,
that's out of the window now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are they gonna do with two hobbits? They're so like vulnerable.
Yeah.
So they have to kind of go like incognito, like through the mountains.
Yeah. But it's also their connection to him that saves them from Faramir.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Because after Faramir realizes just how powerful the ring is, that he's like, oh,
yeah,
probably telling the truth about my brother.
Well, and then Sam and Frodo get to tell him about his brother's death. Yep. Boromir's death lives on, or Boromir lives on.
Yeah. He helps them.
Yeah.
Even in his death.
Yeah. Yeah. Boromir is the savior.
Well, speaking of saviors, we do have a little subsection here.
Yes.
About
Christ.
People who die and are reborn. Yeah, Christ figures.
Yes.
Which I would argue, not with you, just generally, because we already talked about this a little bit, is that it even predates Christ. Like there's stories in multiple religions in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greek, Roman, Slavic culture where there's a resurrection.
Yeah.
And they all, I wouldn't say all of them actually, because like Gandalf isn't the chosen one.
No.
But they all show somebody of like immense power. So just based on our list here. So feel free to argue with us in our DM. Well, argue lightly in our DMs with us.
Nice.
Yeah, where we've got Gandalf, we've got Harry Potter, so Gandalf became the White Wizard, and he earned that shit. He defeated a Balrog. Harry Potter was powerful in his own right because he came from a long line of powerful wizards, plus his mom, who was a known, very like adept wizard. But also, it's kind of unclear whether some of his abilities and his power comes from the fact that he's got that connection to Voldemort. Yeah. Or if it's just that they are. Juniper was the most scrappy and powerful of the three sisters. And
Yes.
so like I would say that hers
from the Once and Future Witches.
yes, thank you. From the Once and Future
yeah.
Witches. I would say hers is less of a traditional resurrection.
Yeah, because
But
she's
for, like-
still like pinned somewhere. Like she's
Yeah, they like
completely free.
bound her soul to
Yeah.
the tower.
Yeah.
And so she can't even fully die, but she did die. She knows that her body like died, but her
Yeah.
soul is just more active than normal.
Yeah.
Feyre, same thing, where she is the High Lady of Night Court. And so it does kind of bring into question like this the role of fate in their world.
Mm-hmm.
Because she wasn't necessarily powerful before. She was powerful after she died, and each of the High Lords gave a little bit of their power to her.
Yeah.
But I would say also that one, so like ACOTAR and Crescent City really feel like they're alluding to like definitely this question of fate, like because you've got mates,
Right.
you've got this connection and this timing that feels all too perfect.
Yes.
And I like when it's like when it falls together and not when it's forced, and it feels like the Moss universe is falling together, you know?
Yeah.
But okay, so you said this one, and this is one of my favorite ones, especially given the like conversation that I'm kind of going on right now. But Gurgi from the Black Cauldron,
Yes.
because his power wasn't in a power like the Bard or like the Magic Pig or anything. It was just his love for his friends.
Yes.
And it was powerful enough that sacrificing himself meant that he was allowed to come back.
Lahaba.
Oh,
That's literally the same character almost, because she says,
yeah.
she says, I
My friends are with me and I'm not afraid.
yes.
Yep. Don't cry.
Okay.
Suck the tears back in.
I know.
Oh
my gosh, because I was like, oh my gosh, this happened before, and I just remembered Lahaba. We didn't mention her, but
I
yeah.
would say that her death was closer to like Gandalf's death.
Yeah.
Where it breaks the characters and they fall apart for a minute.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay,
when she doesn't come back.
Yeah, and she doesn't, so yeah, she doesn't come back. So it's a little bit different from those. But yeah, for sure, like
quick tangent though about Gurgi.
Yes.
So I remember I watched it, and I get really high and watch things apparently, because I remember being like messaging you and being like, oh my gosh, Gurgi is Jesus.
Yeah.
Because, and I said, okay, I remember I have a theory that in ACOTAR the plot cannot, like, they cannot defeat evil without destroying the cauldron, like in the cauldron.
There were,
and
we
the
were
only
reading
way
it at the time.
The only way that they can do that is if someone voluntarily goes in for the right reasons. And it's going to be Gurgi, and they're going to be they're going to be like Jesus, because he's going to die and then come back to life.
Yep. I remember, because that's kind of when we started book club.
Yeah.
And I was watching it and I was thinking, this feels like this is too much right now.
Yeah.
Why is this so connected to ACOTAR?
And she took a lot of inspiration from the Black Cauldron. She mentions that, Sarah J. Maas.
Does she really?
Yeah. So it makes sense that like.
Okay, yeah. I actually didn't know that. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then one I think you just added is Jon Snow, and that's also true.
Yeah.
He is the prince that was promised.
Yeah.
He's the prophesied one. And so he might not have powers like the others, but he's a Targaryen, and Targaryens are powerful in their own right.
Yeah.
But just to mention kind of like the reason I would argue this definitely predates Christ, which I feel like it's not even an argue at this point, is just like the facts, is you got figures like Hercules, who was kind of deified after his death.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear whether he becomes like a full-on god or if he's more just like a lesser spirit that doesn't necessarily go into death. Then you've got Inanna from Mesopotamia and Osiris from Egypt.
Right.
All figures who perish and then return from the dead.
Right.
Just also like the story of Persephone. So she doesn't necessarily die, but she has that same motion of entering the
underworlds and being able to
and
come
then
out.
return. Yeah. Yes. Yep.
I know that from A Touch of Darkness.
Yeah, very accurate to historical retellings. Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, so there's like definitely okay, so I do kind of ascribe to like the Jungian notion of archetypes.
Yes.
And the human story, the 36 faces. And we obviously love characters that can transcend life in one form, or at least like subvert death in the way that we know it.
Yeah.
So like Juniper doesn't necessarily, like, let's say Juniper or Hercules aren't necessarily reborn in the way, or even Christ, they aren't reborn in the way that some of these other ones are, but they subvert death as we know it.
Yes.
They avoid that, like, what's next, and they have this kind of liminal in between existence based on like our perception of life and death.
Yeah.
We love that shit.
Yeah.
That's why we keep throwing it in other things.
Yes.
So, and I will say I love that shit.
Yeah.
I get not wanting people to stay dead. Or no, sorry, I get wanting people to stay dead. Because it can get thrown around really easily. There was something that we watched. Not we specifically. I think I mean collectively. Because I just remember people on the internet talking about like, oh, they'll just bring them back. It's fine.
Yeah.
It might have been Jon Snow.
Yeah, because I remember it either the season or I think the season had ended.
Yeah.
With his death. And it was and at that point in the series, we already know that people die.
Yeah.
You know, like they had already established like there's always going to be someone that dies. But Jon Snow was too integral to everything.
Yeah.
Like he had already been established as like, yeah, kind of this chosen one. And so it didn't feel right. Like it didn't even feel right for like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people had an issue with that. And then there was like more like mystical, magical things going on that we were like, okay, like maybe something could happen, you know? We're like, this still is a fantasy. You know, like
yeah, I feel like it was Game of Thrones. I don't know if it was Jon Snow though, but I remember it was like something big where the character just kept coming back. And it was like, yeah, it was like, I want to say it was like by the third time or something. And they were like, I don't really care anymore. Like the deaths don't mean anything anymore because I don't know, maybe it was Game of Thrones. Maybe it was Jon. I can't remember now. But yeah, so it's one of those things again that should be used smartly.
Yes.
But see, I think that's a fun part of like death stuff. Yeah. Is the resurrection, because I think there's also a weight to it, you know.
And then it's a bit more like it's a bit more philosophical. It's not just people's like sometimes we end. It's like, no, like why is this person being chosen, and what are they like serving afterwards, and how? Because I do think that can reveal a lot about like what kind of world you're reading. You know, is like what happens after you die, that we don't really get to see in every book. And so I feel like that kind of shows like this other like side, like kind of beyond Earth side.
Yeah. I keep thinking back to Juniper because Juniper's world was so like ours, and it really feels like the reason she was able to be saved in their world is because she like, well, I think they all do. So they all kind of contain something that is necessary for the story still.
Yeah.
So for like the function of their universe, right? Their fictional universe. And Juniper just had fight. She
Yeah.
had the spark. And so it almost feels like it's implying that as long as she lives at the tower, witchcraft will live in their world, you know?
Right.
Whereas like for Gandalf, he had this this leadership that was just kind of getting stoked when the Fellowship got together. But then he just like steps into those shoes. He is the reason that Minas Tirith, that Gondor came to or called for Rohan.
Yeah.
He's the reason Rohan got that assistance at Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
And so after he comes back, I hadn't really thought about that before, but after he comes back, he's fully stepped into this leadership role without hesitation.
Yeah.
So
it's like
that's like what he had to provide.
And it's not so much like a second chance like you think it's going to be. It's more of like a rebirth. Literally.
Yeah.
Which is Scorpio season.
Yeah. Well, that's like we've got Poppy and Feyre on here. That's exactly what happens to them. Like Poppy and Feyre. Well, I think Poppy technically dies because that's like what you need for a vampire transition.
Right.
But both of them have to die more or less so that they can step into the like fantasy power that they are, that's like waiting for them basically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we covered it. Most of them.
I know, like we talked about the rebirth so much.
Because it's such an interesting, it's an unavoidable part of fantasy, I think. Because that is what fantasy is. Not even like science fiction really has that unless it's like
science fiction is like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Like if there's a rebirth in science fiction, it's like an ethical question.
Yeah. But in fantasy, it's a spiritual.
Yes, it's
thing.
very spiritual.
Yeah.
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 I'm kind of looking through some of the other deaths that we had listed down here.
Yes.
So there's a couple of like sacrifices. So we've got Holland from Darker Shades and then Cormac from Crescent City. And I think that as much as I hate them, I love the sacrifice. There's something so noble. Something so noble about it. Like,
well, because it's the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
It shows the extent to which people live.
Yeah.
That they would die for you.
And there's always something like, my voice cracked there. So I gotta step forward carefully. There's always a specific reasoning behind their sacrifice that like breaks you. So for like Holland, it was because there was still that shred of hope left in him for what the world could be. Whereas for Cormac, it was because without his love, he didn't care to see the world in the future. He wanted to help. So he was like, I'll just do this, but when we win, I don't care what happens afterwards because I won't have her.
Yeah.
And like that's sad. Like shit like that is sad.
Yeah.
That hits different because you're right, it's like the ultimate sacrifice that they can make. It shows the extent of their beliefs or their motivations, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's
Cormac's
living.
death's still sad. Yeah, no, it is. It is.
Yeah. So it kind of I feel like those who sacrificed lived the most, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why we read fiction, because we try to step into these other shoes. We want to experience more lives than we can live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think seeing somebody that loves something or someone that much, it hits, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we just read New Moon.
Yeah.
And granted it has its problems, but that's what like people want to read about. It's like what like literally what hill are you willing to die on?
Yes. Yes. What
Yeah.
hell? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If it's
Yeah.
like Leaba who sacrificed herself for her friends,
Yeah.
that is the hill she's willing to die on. She's willing to sacrifice her freedom to save her friends.
Well, and even Boromir, um, giving up his doubt,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of his weakness was because of his doubt for the human race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was always about like, oh, like Gondor this and Gondor that and how great it is. And it's almost like if you have to say it, like you are trying really hard.
Yeah.
Because think about coming from like the human race in Middle Earth, and like the elves are fine.
Oh yeah. They're
You
doing
know,
great. As always.
the dwarves are keeping to themselves, and the men are just like trying to find like some way to like to be like. And I think Boromir then coming to this council full of like all these different races, really you really are like having to kind of like fight for what you are. And so I feel like there's a lot of doubt in a sport. And of course Denethor wasn't like a great dad.
Yeah.
And so when he decides to fight to his death to save the hobbits, he's also like giving up his I think a lot of the reason why he was going towards the ring so much, or he was so susceptible to it, was because of that doubt.
Yeah.
Because he was like, I need like humans need help. And
yeah.
and so he was desperate.
He's been fed.
Yeah. And so I think part of that too was also giving up his pride of his like homeland and his race to like, I guess, say. Anyways.
No, I feel that.
I just realized that now. I thought that was interesting.
And then I would also argue that his growing fondness of Merry and Pippin was also like this almost like necessary reparenting of himself.
Yeah.
Because he saw these creatures that were lesser than him in his own perception.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's like weird hints that the hobbits are actually kind of super powerful.
Yeah.
But they're short. They don't know how to fight with swords.
They're childlike and
childlike, exactly. And like he sees them become brave. He sees that moment that Frodo steps back and he knows that Frodo is being braver than he is. And I think that's really necessary to his, like, that is the moment where he really sees where he went wrong.
Yeah.
In his thinking.
Yeah.
When like the hobbit who is wearing the ring is kind of thinking more clearly in that moment than he is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I mean, the problem with Boromir too is that his descent is really supposed to show how easily the ring is like or can take over somebody's mental capacities. And so it sucks that it's him.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense that it's him.
Yeah.
Because he's coming from this position, like you said, this like lower position than the other creatures, the other beings there.
Yeah.
And he's had a really shitty father who's instilled some really like unfortunate thought processes into him. And he's kind of got like a chip on his shoulder for both of those reasons. And that's hard, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like after Rings of Power, everything's like my whole consciousness is on like Lord of the Rings now.
Yeah.
And how long has it been was it 2001 it came out?
Yeah.
So it's been 20 years.
Fuck.
Oh my God, I'm so old. I was like 12 when it came out. Yeah, so
I was 6.
we're old.
So,
Yeah.
um,
But yeah, it's like I love like revisiting it because it's so it's hitting different.
Timeless.
It's so timeless. Like,
yeah.
and I remember like watching it because we'll watch it every like periodically and we'll be like, oh wow, that's like really dated, or like, oh yeah, like that part or that part. But then it like becomes such an icon. And then you're like, this is, and then like it was the moment where I was like, holy shit, like this is such an iconic moment where Gandalf puts his staff down and says, you shall not pass. Like,
Yes.
it's like a fucking, it's like surpassed meme. It's like,
well, like
that's like, it's so pivotal and like,
it's such a powerful moment. Like that's kind
Yeah.
of part of the reason it became a meme too, is
Yeah.
because there's nothing else that can sum up the prowess in that
Yeah.
entire moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, we could talk
Yeah.
about Lord of the Rings.
We know
So
we
the
can
cows come up. We have.
yes. Okay.
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 But yeah, so death. So that
It
those
definitely
were
went a
all
little
of the
bit like
deaths.
left of where I expected it to go.
Yeah.
But I
This
think
was
it's
actually a much more, I mean, I knew it was going to be like a really fun and interesting episode, but it like
yeah.
was it really delivered.
Yeah.
I feel like.
And I don't know if so we had kind of talked about this being a series on scenes,
Yeah.
but I feel like we talked more about it as a theme.
Yeah.
So maybe
Which I
that's
kind
what
of
our
like.
series should be.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Like different
In bed
themes. And I
with,
think it still fits for what we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah, because
Well,
we kind of want to talk about like love scenes.
yes.
We want to talk about fight scenes
Fight and betrayals.
and betrayals. And
And
then
then
also like
revenge.
revenge. Yeah. So those will be
Yes.
fun.
Potential definite topics that we will be talking about this season.
Yes, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think so. What are we reading next week? Next week we will be reading
Gleam.
Gleam. Yes.
Definitely Gleam. Not one of the other books in the show in the series.
Not Glint. Not
we nailed it this time. We said
Yes.
it right every single time.
Yes. So we are continuing the Plated Prisoner series. Next week we will be talking about Gleam by Raven Kennedy. So
hopefully Aaron and Rip slash Slade
smash.
Hopefully
they smash.
Hopefully they smash. They make up, and we get some actually like amazing sex and not just rape.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Enough saddles. Let's have some like consensual, like much earned, lovely sex, please.
Consensual and sensual.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah. Join us next week.
Yep.
Until then, happy reading.
Happy reading.
Bye.
Bye.